When this story happened, I had nice black hair and wasn't bald like now. But I have to tell someone this story. Maybe then it will stop haunting my mind, and I will drink my tea in peace. We were fresh married and were renting a one-bedroom apartment in Ulaanbaatar. You know these nights when it is especially dark and cold. It is then when it all started. I woke up at 3 a.m. to my wife eating loudly in bed. I waited for a few minutes, but no luck. She continued eating, slurping, and smacking. Finally, I burst out. "Stop smacking! If you're still that hungry, go to the kitchen." The noises stopped, but my wife didn't respond. Then I heard her snoring. The next day I braced myself for the consequences of my short fuse. But she didn't do any of the things she usually did when upset with me. There was no layer of sugar in my tuna sandwich packed for work, and the sticker read the usual, "Love you, my bear," with a heart. No inappropriate drawing or cuss words. At dinner, she also behaved normally, elbowing me every time she thought she'd made a good joke. So I relaxed. Even though she had her ways of getting to me when annoyed, we made a pretty good team. I cleaned. She cooked. I did the laundry. She took care of the plants. The next night, I woke up from her chewing again. Not wanting to upset her, I summoned all the patience I had and started counting sheep in my head. When the 345th sheep successfully jumped over the fence, I realized I was hearing two noises that couldn't coexist: her chewing and smacking noisily, and her quiet snoring. I slowly sat up in bed and looked at my wife. In the moonlight, I saw her peaceful face. We had no pets at home, and the window was shut, so it couldn't be coming from outside. I got up, forgetting to put on my slippers, and walked around the room to study the source of the noise. I felt a cold knot in my stomach when I realized the noise was coming from my wife. I rushed to turn on the lights. "What are you doing?" My voice sounded higher than usual. My wife woke up, squinted her eyes at the light, and looked confused. "What's wrong?" she asked. The smacking noise had stopped. It was quiet. "I keep hearing you eating so loudly, but you're sleeping." I felt stupid, hearing how weird my sentence sounded. "What are you talking about? Are you dreaming?" With this, she jumped up and ran to the kitchen. I followed her. There she was drinking water, her hand shaking, spilling it down her neck. Tears started forming in the corners of her eyes. It was no time to pressure her with questions, but I didn't sleep until morning. The next night, the smacking sound continued to annoy and scare me. The moonlight was illuminating the wall. The small hand on the clock on the wall pointed to 3. Then something else happened that froze my blood. If I could sink into and disappear somewhere inside my mattress, I would gladly do that. Along with the chewing sounds, I heard something small that sounded like it had multiple legs running on the floor between the bed and the window. Imagine if spiders were the same size as kittens and made stomping noises every time they ran. This is how it sounded. It ran around and then stopped. My body became stiff, and I realized I couldn't move. I don't know if I was sleeping or lying awake and hallucinating. But in the morning I had a strange memory of something jumping onto our bed and crawling toward us. It felt more like a dream. In the end, I half convinced myself it was my tired mind's tricks. I couldn't tell my wife about it, as she still seemed uneasy. She didn't talk much and had a thick frown between her eyebrows. She kept rubbing the back of her neck. When I reached for her as usual to massage her stiff shoulders or neck, she jerked away. I shrugged and continued eating my potatoes, too tired to try to break the tension. We ate dinner in silence and went to bed in silence. At night, I woke up at 3 again. That many-legged creature from yesterday was moving around on the floor beside my side of the bed. I shut my eyes so tightly that my eyeballs started hurting. I counted sheep again. After a while, that something was gone. Probably it went through the door. My wife was serious about air circulation, so we kept our bedroom door open at night. Just as I thought of the door, some noise came from there. But it sounded different. Now it was a stomping noise. Imagine if someone could walk silently, but hit a stick on the floor with each step. But it sounded as if the surface of the end of the stick somehow was much bigger. It was a softer, a thudding sort of sound, not sharp and rhythmic as the one a stick would have produced. That's how it sounded. It moved painfully slowly across the room. I heard it stop near my wife's feet for a moment. Very slowly, with the speed of a snail, I peeked through my half-open eyelids. It didn't resemble a human shape at all. It looked more like an object, a bit taller than our bed. As soon as I tried to figure out what it looked like, it twitched and started moving to my side. This is when something warm brushed against my legs. I pursed my lips in fear and shame. The last time I wet the bed was when I didn't even remember myself. I laid motionless for hours. It went cold, and the sheets stuck to my legs disgustingly. There was no noise anymore, but I didn't dare to open my eyes until I heard my wife getting up in the morning. To this day, I still wonder if she knew what I had done. But she didn't mention anything about the new mattress, and never asked about that beige sheet again. That day, I survived solely on caffeine, drinking 6 cups of espresso. All my library research of old mystery books yielded nothing but tiredness and desperation. When I came home, I saw my wife throwing what was left of a pillow into the trash can. It looked as if it had been attacked by a very aggressive dog. I asked my wife nothing about the pillow. There were more important and stranger things to talk about. I sat her down on the living room couch. So, last night, I started. She looked at me with no expression. "Did you hear that?" I asked. She didn't look surprised or scared. It was as if her darkest secret had been exposed. She buried her face in her hands. The leg and the hand. Her voice came choked through her palms. "The what?" She slowly removed her palms from her face and looked at me. "I have to tell you something. It will be a lot." She stood up, took out a lavender bag, and handed it to me to smell. Then she brought me a glass of water from the kitchen. 4 ice cubes floated in it. "Well," my wife started, "you know my family has some strangeness, and," she paused. "I never thought I'd be forced to believe it. Just like you, I thought it was nothing more than an old legend." She paused again. I waited. Then she continued. "When my grandfather was young, he lived in a village in Siberia. One day, one of the neighbors started acting weird. He talked about spirits and said they kept coming to him at night, calling him to become a shaman. He talked to trees. The people said he was preparing to become a shaman." She looked at me seriously. The next moment, she screamed in pain, reaching to the back of her neck, but pulled her hand away abruptly, and I saw blood dripping from her finger. We stood up at the same time. She ran into the bathroom and locked herself inside. I started banging. "Are you okay? Open up!" I screamed. "It's hungry again. You don't want to see this. Don't come," she screamed. "Come on, open up!" I wish I had never opened that door. I wish I had listened to her begging me not to come in. She knew what she was talking about. At that time, I thought those 3 a.m. noises were the creepiest things that could happen to us. Oh, how wrong I was. The vision of what I saw got imprinted in my mind, and sometimes, after a long or especially stressful day, I still see it somewhere between sleeping and awakening. I kicked open the door and collapsed next to my wife, who was sitting on the floor in hysterics. It took a long time to soothe her. In the end, she pulled away her scarf and turned her back, allowing me to see the scar at the back of her neck. She had told me it was from surgery for a lipoma when she was 19. Without warning, that scar opened up, revealing red flesh inside and a set of huge teeth that clutched. Blood still dripped down from the upper teeth. I screamed, and my ears hurt from my own screaming. I ran away from the bedroom so fast that I hit my eyebrow on the door, but didn't notice it. I checked in a hotel. Only then did I realize what exactly I had been hearing those nights, why the pillow was destroyed, and the nature of the chewing sounds. I was just glad I had been too scared to turn on the lights. I had no desire to see the shaman's hand or leg walking in my bedroom. Those 2 days were full of migraines, hand tremors, and cigarettes. After a couple of days, I drove home. "Don't apologize," was the first thing she said when she opened the door. We sat in the kitchen. As she did her usual domestic things, I thought I could never live with her again. "I won't blame you if you leave," she said. It wasn't time to pretend to be a hero. I hoped I could still be able to be called a good person. But I was never noble, and never pretended to be the one. I promised not to let anyone learn the true reason of our divorce. It would be, we realized we are too different. We fell out of love and other excuses. But the true reason remained silent. I told no one but you, dear reader. Jen heard a groan coming from somewhere close. It took her a minute to realize that the groan was coming from her. She then noticed that something was wet and dripping from somewhere above her forehead. As she tried to reach up and feel the spot that was dripping, she grunted because she could not move her arms. At first, she could not figure out why. Then she realized that they were tied to the chair on which she was sitting. The realization forced Jen to wake up quickly and come to terms with her surroundings. She tried to open her eyes slowly. Everything was blurry, and of what she could make out, it was all dark. She gave her head a little shake to try and clear the cobwebs and immediately regretted it. Her brain felt as if it was on fire in the middle of a jello mold. She then tried to sit up straight, but with the angle of where her hands were tied to the chair, was forcing her to remain folded over. Jen opened her eyes again and tried to focus on what was beyond the dark. She could barely make out a shadow of another figure that also was sitting in a chair hunched over like her. "Hello?" she whispered fervently, trying to see if the other figure was awake. No answer. So she tried again a little louder. She didn't want to be too loud because she was still unsure of where she was and how she got there. If it was at the hands of someone else, she certainly didn't want to alert them to the fact that she was lucid. Still, no answer. Jen closed her eyes and shook her head again, a bit more gently, this time careful not to shake her brain too much. When she opened them again, she noticed that the figure in front of her still had not moved. Forget it. For now, she thought they were not going to be able to help. She was going to have to help both. This time, she looked around carefully at her feet to see what she could recognize. The first step to getting them both out was to figure out where they were and what they were being held with. She was indeed sitting on a chair, she noticed, which was metal. On the ground, she noticed dirt and wood chips. So far, nothing standing out that could help her predict where she was, or how to get out of the situation. She tilted her head slightly to the right, and from that vantage point she could just barely make out an old rusty nail. She tried to look down at her wrists to see what kind of binding was holding her there, but from the way she was tied up, she was unable to tell. She then had the thought of looking at the figure sitting across from her. Odds being that they were both tied up with the same bindings. Jen squinted as much as she could to focus her sight and saw that the figure across the way was being held with what looked like old twine, like the kind you would find in a barn. Step 1. Check. Now that she knew what kind of binding it was, the next step was to try and figure out her surroundings. Jen lifted her head up as high as she could to look at what was in her eyesight to see if she could make out any markings or logos. But it was too dark. In one corner of the room, she did notice a small sliver of light that seemed to emanate from above her. So she deduced that it was in fact night outside, and that was a part of why it was so dark inside. The light must be coming from the moon outside, or a street light. This thought presented Jen with another conundrum, though. Did she want to wait out the night until she could see again, giving her a better chance at finding a way out of here? Or did she want to risk it not knowing who it was that had put her there, and whether they were going to come back to finish the job? Jen thought about it for a second. But then every nerve in her body was telling her that she would be stupid to try and wait it out. So she quickly dismissed that idea and decided she needed to focus on finding a way out for both of them. Since she could not pinpoint exactly where they were being held, Jen decided that her next move would be to try and get out of the chair. The only tool she saw that could help her was the rusty nail. She looked again and figured that it was about 5 feet away from her current position, and if she could scoot the chair over closer, then she might have a chance at getting it up off the ground. The tricky thing was going to be moving the chair over as a whole, with her body on it, without just tipping over to the ground and being stuck on her side. Jen thought about it. She was not some small, dainty thing of a girl. She had some curves on her, and that could either work to her advantage or against it. She first tried to scoot a little to the right and almost topped over. She quickly managed to adjust her weight and stay upright in the chair. So that is not going to work, she thought. Jen let out a frustrated breath and waited a second to make sure she did not hear anyone coming in to look for her. She then decided that it would be best to adjust the full force of her weight up to the front of her chair as much as she could. She was able to scoot a little using her butt and thigh muscles to propel herself forward a bit. She then took a moment to tilt her head to the left again, so that she could see exactly where the nail was. Folding herself all the way over, she shifted her feet in the direction she hoped the rest of her would go and slowly started to turn the chair, so that she was now facing the nail. She paused for a second to listen to any sounds, then, as soon as she felt it was safe, she slowly shifted her way closer to the nail until she could reach it with her hand. The whole ordeal felt like it had taken over an hour, and it had left her feeling used up. Her head was still throbbing, and the wetness that had been dripping earlier was now feeling like it had congealed into a clump on her forehead. Now that she had the nail in her hand, Jen felt like she had a real chance of getting out of there, or at the very least of getting out of the chair. She first tried pointing the rusty end of the nail into the knot at her wrists to try and undo it, but from her position was not able to get enough momentum to make anything happen, and in trying, so she had almost dropped the nail twice. She then decided to pivot and try to use the nail to unravel the twice that was just tied around her ankles. If I can get it loose enough, she thought, then maybe I can wiggle my ankle free. And that would allow me to lift my right arm and get a better angle at the knot on my wrist. She worked on the twine at her ankle and was able to loosen the threads enough to wiggle her right foot out. Since her foot and wrist were no longer connected to each other, this gave her the freedom to raise her right arm up to her hip. With the little bit of extra rope she gained from releasing her ankle, she was able to put the nail in between her thighs, pointy side up, and work the rope over it back and forth until it gave way. From there, all Jen had to do was free her other side. She worked as quickly and as quietly as she could. Once she was free, She fell to the ground on all fours to quietly shuffle over to where she thought she had seen the other figure. Since it was so dark in the room still and outside, she thought it was best to stay low, so she did not run into anything inadvertently and hurt herself more. She moved closer to where she thought the other person was being held. She reached out in front of her, trying to feel a foot or a leg, or at least a chair leg, and she felt nothing. Jen did not panic, though. Maybe I got turned around and went in the wrong direction, she thought. Without a bright light source and with her blurry vision, it would be easy to get confused. She decided then to shift her focus on finding a way out. If she could find the door, then she could let light in the room, and she would then be able to go out and look for help. Jen kept moving forward until she reached what felt like a wall. Only then did she feel safe enough to stand up. Once upright, she let herself have a good stretch. Every muscle in her body screamed at her. Who knows how long she had been folded over in that position. After stretching, she stood there for a minute and tried adjusting her eyes again, but still nothing. Everything was so blurry that she could not see more than 2 feet in front of her. She turned to face the wall again and started moving to the left, feeling along with her hands, looking for a door or an opening. After what seemed like an eternity and half the space, she finally felt a doorknob. Jen yanked at the door with all her strength, which turned out to not to be needed as the door flew open, knocking her back on her butt. How weird that the door would be unlocked with 2 people tied up inside, she thought. This thought scared her, because if whoever had kidnapped her and held her didn't feel the need to lock the door, that meant they didn't perceive her to be a threat. Who knows what they had in store for her? Jen took a second to collect her thoughts and to, again, check to make sure she didn't hear anything. When she felt like the coast was clear, she peeked her head around the corner to check to see if she saw anyone. That is when she discovered a second weird thing. There was nobody around. All she heard was the usual sounds of nighttime. What the hell happened tonight? She thought. She gingerly stepped outside, glad to feel the air and have it confirmed that it was dark outside. Some good news, she thought. At least I am not completely blind. She reached up and tentatively touched the left side of her forehead, where indeed there was congealing happening. When she brought her hand down from her face, she could feel something sticky and noticed dark liquid on her fingers. Blood died, she thought. Okay. Now that she had determined that the area was clear, she could go back in and try to look again for the other person she saw. But when she opened the door wider to let more light in, she looked. What she did not see terrified her the most that night. She looked through the whole room, and there was not one other person in there. No other chair, no other bindings, no other hostage. What she did see was a line of mirrors covering the walls. In horror, Jen realized that the other shadowy figure she had seen tied up with her had been her own reflection. That was all she needed. She quickly turned around in the other direction and started running. Where she was going, she did not know. Nor did she care. What she did know was that she was not going to stick around that funhouse of horrors to wait and see what her kidnapper had in store for her. I stared at the portrait of Dr. Guillotin for a long time, holding my own head in my hands. When I finally got access to a mobile phone and the internet in the 21st century, here in a building in New York, where I've lived for the past 2 decades. That satisfied half smile and the ridiculous white wig under which, I'm sure, his greasy, sticky hair reeked, stays with me even now. However, I quickly learned, after searching online, that he didn't actually invent the device that beheaded me back in 1793 in Paris. Innocent. Of course. After that sharp piece of metal fell on my soft, slender young neck, I immediately saw my own eyes staring back at me. My head, yes, my head, had rolled away, separating from me, yet it was still me, at the same time. My ghost head, for lack of a better word, looked at my, well, human head. Caught in a strange kind of procession, somewhere in the dreamlike waters of the world. My consciousness existed in two places, I'd say, about 10 seconds, if it's even possible to measure time being in two places at once, before I became this, a headless ghost, who must carry his head everywhere he goes. Are you listening to me? I asked the dog, who was panting and staring at the sunset as it burst apart, just before it was about to melt into a bloody meridian. A perfect moment in time when the guillotine falls on the day. A precise line that ends one thing and begins another. The hairy creature with shiny black eyes and a rough tongue doesn't understand me, I know, but sometimes it's necessary to pretend we're communicating, just to feel like we exist. That what's happening to us has some meaning. This remains true, even post-mortem. When I was still alive, at this time of year, I loved roasting chestnuts. Ah yes, the crunch of dry leaves underfoot, the smell of damp earth, the freshness of the mind, the freshness of melancholy, the remnants of soot on my fingers from peeling chestnuts my brother and I roasted behind our house, the crackling fire in the metal barrel. I've never met anyone in the afterlife. I shook my head with my hands, trying to stop thinking about my previous life, and placed it on the rough gray stone by the water, where I liked to sit and reflect on the wounded sky's reflection in the lake of Central Park. That couple, holding hands with scarves wrapped around their necks, I never had that. Never the warmth of romantic love. The endless entanglements of my revolutionary mind led me to ideals, and those ideals somehow implied solitude. I don't like irony, but now I'm truly alone. It's funny that today people use the term ghosting when someone doesn't reply or avoids you. But yes, I think I understand. Isn't that right? I asked the dog again, who lifted his backside off the gray stone and ran off, spending his time before death caught up with him. Will he become a ghost like me? I don't know what makes someone a ghost. I'm sure there are others. But the whole point of being a ghost is that no one sees or hears you. Centuries of solitude. I'm not sad, I promise. I'm sure there are others, but I just can't reach them. All that's left is watching people, living their lives. Right now I'm living, or rather, existing, in an apartment with a newlywed couple who are in the honeymoon phase, as they say, and I watch their lives. Besides all the touching, which I don't watch, I must clarify, although you probably don't believe me, you who are listening to my internal monologue, because it's become tiresome and revolting. The amount of that, as I'll call it, in today's world is simply staggering and off-putting. Passion is defiled. So, besides all the touching and laughing, I've noticed they spend too much time staring at screens. Sometimes, our apartment feels like it has 3 ghosts living in it, and every day it becomes more intense, bit by bit. First, their feet began to disconnect, then their hands. The honeymoon is fading. Now they eat while watching some series on Netflix, completely unaware that my body is on one side and my head on the other. Somehow, I don't like taking sides. I don't think I will, even when they start fighting. How glad I am that I can't hear other people's thoughts, though I hope someone hears mine. Imagine all you'd hear when you hear what they choose to say. If I could, I'd shudder. Oh, and while we're on that topic, one neat trick is that I can't feel nauseous or throw up. I'm free from physical illnesses and needs. If there's any silver lining in this lonely hell, it's that. A silver lining, I suppose. Soon the day's death will end. Look, Who invented the guillotine anyway? I don't have my tenants' phones here. I can't sneak a peek. And yes, if anyone's listening, know that I once got burned snooping through people's private things. I'm not interested in that. But who was it? There were two of them. My hands shake my head again, like a black magic 8-ball. What is fate? A single flow of reality? The idea of order in existence? I don't like it. As someone who was innocently beheaded in front of a crowd that spat and cursed, I can't say order exists. History says Dr. Guillotine proposed banning public executions. If they had adopted that, maybe it would have been easier for me. Maybe it would have been closer to justice. Justice? Let's not dwell on such topics after so much time, on a day like this. Autumn, full of silence. Park lampposts. Benches. Everything is quieting down. I remember when I first learned about Ouija boards. How hard I tried to communicate. Another crack. Oh no. More memories. A rainy day at my mother's funeral. A sunny one at my father's. Snow that winter when my brother died in the cholera epidemic. And his wife. And their children. 1832. Yes. History is a collection of terrible events. What is the problem of this era? What awaits these people? Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, Macbeth. The day passed, and I stole a piece of bread because I was hungry. Because my brother was hungry. Now, I am a headless ghost, witnessing time pass. My existence is observation. Watching this world. The same shaky stage, farce upon farce, which sometimes holds a sweetness worth devoting oneself to. A sweetness worth simply feeling, because recording it steals the feeling. I must go now to watch some TV show with my tenants, who sneak glances at reels and posts while the show plays. Later, with a brief kiss, they'll turn their backs to each other in bed. And I'll sit and wait for a new day. I take my transparent white head in my hands, which turns blue in the moonlight. The grass grows damp. I hope I wasn't just white noise to you, whoever is listening. Look at the flock of people. They're rushing somewhere. I'll have to leave New York soon. I've felt it as much as I can. I think I need to move on to marginal places. Maybe there, in the quiet, someone will hear me. I stole a piece of bread. Shadows of the marathon. Clara stood in the midst of more than 300 other participants, somewhere in the middle of all them, swallowing the impulse to pace the area. Even if she did let it take control, though, there wasn't any space for her to even shuffle her feet, much less pace. On the foggy October morning, there shouldn't have been this many people crowded at the starting line of the track, but it was the annual marathon that took place every autumn, and many had been inspired to join. Clara was used to running. She'd been doing it more than half of her life, so something like running the 26 miles felt almost natural to her, even though her parents would much rather if it didn't. They wanted her to marry a man that met their standards and have a successful job in the corporate business, an adequate goal that Clara was begrudgingly working towards. Her one and only dream was to become a professional runner, and one day maybe compete in the Olympics. Clara had been told it was an impossible dream, not only by her parents, but it had been implied by her boyfriend, Ethan, as well. It always felt like a punch to the gut whenever someone mentioned something about it. Clara squeezed her eyes shut and opened them again to find that everyone was already in a stance, getting ready to run, so she positioned herself in a similar way, biting her lip as the cold air chilled her to the bone and a dark shadow cast over her and the other runners. She was grateful that she had at least worn sweatpants for this, because goosebumps were already beginning to form on the parts of her arms that were exposed from her top, that had sleeves which went up 3/4, leaving a patch of skin bare. "Are you ready, ladies and gents, participants and bystanders, because the annual autumn marathon will begin very shortly," announced a man with a megaphone, sitting up high on a seat that required a ladder to get up to. Clara's heart thumped and thrashed in her chest. No matter how many times she began a race, she could never fend off the nervous thoughts squirming in the back of her mind. 3, 2, 1, go. The whistle blew, and Clara propelled her legs forward, her steady breaths visible in the cold. Her feet rhythmically hit the pavement, one step after the other, the misty air settling around her like a cloak. The ground was red, with white painted lines indicating the lanes. But for the amount of people, the lines were beginning to blur into each other. Just one large track where they all ran. As Clara pushed on, she vaguely heard someone speak after a lapse of time, telling them they had finished the first mile. As more people had begun to get tired, they had slowed even as Clara kept a steady pace, so she had singled herself out, keeping her breaths even and normal. Clouds drifted above, one particularly large, one looming in the grayish sky, and the fog thickened, making a tiny part in Clara's mind to become uneasy. She tossed the thought out of the window and focused on the running, pacing herself, remembering all the times she had trained and done things that had been much more difficult than this. And with those memories came images of Ethan's face, back when the love had been fresh. But they'd run it dry now, and all that was left were empty promises and staying together only because they had no one else. It took all of Clara's mental power to shove all thoughts of Ethan out of her mind, to shove every bad thought out of her mind, and just think of something that made her happy. Except she couldn't. All that surfaced were splintered memories of how it used to be, and voices she recognized, but had mixed feelings towards. Her family, her mother, her father, her sister. Clara swallowed back bile, but convinced herself it was only because of the growing fog. Now that she was thinking about it, it was kind of strange, especially since the weather forecasts today had told everyone the sky would be clear and sunny but not humid. Silence. It was all Clara could hear. The screaming of the crowds no longer wafted through the air. The sounds of footsteps padding along the track no longer set the balanced rhythm for her. The people who were beginning to pant no longer ticked her off. Silence. It was like that for another few moments, but Clara ran on, telling herself over and over again that it was probably all in her head. That managed to work, until she began hearing voices. It started out slowly as faint echoes that penetrated the bubble of stillness she had found herself wrapped in, and although it was eventually escalating into a shout storm of voices, Clara could clearly make out one line that repeated over and over. "Good girls don't act like this, Clara. You'll ruin the family name." She was sitting at the dinner table now, transported into another universe, fidgeting with her fingers and blonde hair framing her face like a curtain again. A hollow hole opened and split apart her stomach as her mother's narrowed eyes punctured her lungs, and Clara couldn't breathe for a moment. She looked away, trying to find a space she could breathe without the suffocating expectations polluting the air. It took great effort, but Clara detached herself from the memory, squinting as figures started to take shape in the fog. Her family. Taking a sharp turn, she left them behind, but had to check behind her after another minute of plain running. She was panting now. Not a good sign, but it was probably because of the flashback. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to get stuck in her memories. She was supposed to run the marathon and win. Nothing was changing, though. If anything, the fog was growing denser, and the place was becoming thick with more and more shadows, and Clara was tripping over herself trying to get herself out. What happened? Why was she suddenly isolated and all alone now? Her heartbeat sped up, thumping and thrashing against her chest, and she couldn't even remember what mile she was on now. Was it 5? 6? 7? Everything was fading into a blur of motion, and Clara had no choice or power in it, no matter how hard she pushed on. Clara's gaze flicked to the side, coming in contact with a cluster of trees growing taller by the second. It was as though the crowd had morphed into thick, large pine trees. In the midst of all the shades of green bleeding into each other, another figure developed and stalked towards her, steps slow and monotone like a zombie. His features began to appear as well, and Clara stifled a gasp as she recognized it. It looked just like Ethan, and now he was right beside her, matching her pace as whispers filled her mind. "You can't do this on your own, Clara. You're too weak." His footsteps faded, but the lines kept repeating like a broken record, filling into the cracks of Clara's mind. Clara still ran, even though her body felt like tearing itself apart. She didn't even know how it was happening. She was running normally, like she always was. But this track, her family, Ethan, everything was making her weary and distracted, tired and battered. Clara shivered, her whole body trembling. She had lost count of what mile she was on a long time ago, as everything was slowly fading away. Every step felt heavier, as though the ground was becoming quicksand, as though it was pulling her under and the fog was wrapping her up in a tight nightmare, with the voices surrounding her like a whirlwind, and she just wanted to break free, but she couldn't. Clara ran deeper, pushing her hardest, begging herself to find a way out of this mess, out of the forest she had somehow now found herself in. Words and snippets of conversations were still surrounding her, and she felt like she was losing her mind. She felt like her brain was spinning out of control. Everything was slipping out of her fingers, like trying to carry water in your hands. Clara lost her sense of direction, Ethan's voice echoing in her brain, louder than the rest this time. "You can't escape me. It won't work like that. I have better things to do than sit here listening to you ramble on about that." Ethan stood up and left, and Clara tripped over herself again, only now feeling that hot tears were streaming down her face, her eyes all bloodshot and puffy. She looked down, feeling the ground shift beneath her, and when dreaded realization smacked her straight in the face, she wanted to fall flat on her face. Except it felt like she was stuck running, her feet unable to pause, to skid to a stop, which only made her desire to slam her face into a brick wall even stronger. She looked around, only to find it desolate. The whole place, the track. She had been running in circles, stuck in a loop, and she would stay like that forever. Clara recalled what she had been denying all this time. She had never left Ethan. All those times she thought she was escaping by running. It had only triggered the storm further. She had tried, and failed, to escape Ethan, her family, but she had only ended up in a cycle of control that had gripped her and tied her neck in a tight knot, strangling her and drawing her into the life of despair. And then it hit her. She wasn't running a marathon. At least not anymore. It was like she was watching her life through metaphors. Images of herself trapped in a box flooded her like an avalanche. She was handcuffed, the keys tossed away, and she could only save herself by finding the answer inside of her. But it felt like she would never find it. Not with all the problems distracting her from finding the real thing. Everything escalated higher, higher, higher. And even when Clara thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. More voices, everything erupted into flames, into ashes, and Clara couldn't stop sprinting, even as her legs felt like jelly and were about to fall off. She couldn't stop. The voices whispered her deepest fears, ones she didn't even know she possessed. You'll never leave. You belong to us now. Never leave. Clara broke down. She stopped running. She fell to the floor on her knees, panting and breathing, eyes blurry with tears that were still yet to be shed. It was over. It was all over. She was at the starting line once more. Except it was just her. Two choices. Either continue down the shadowy path or break free. Clara shuddered at the thought of going back into the nightmare. But breaking free would mean a lot of things. Breaking up with Ethan. Explaining things to her family that would probably only end in arguments. Keeping herself steady and calm and just focusing on her passion. Wow. It seemed doable. But could she really do it? Can I really do it? The question rang in her mind, replaying, and each time, she never had an answer. Until Clara took a shaky breath, a deep one, lifted her head and stood up on quivering legs. Her hair had come out of the ponytail, now spilling in long locks down her back. She tucked a loose strand behind her ear, took another deep breath. Clara broke free. It was dark, very dark, and neither of the two could see where they were running, but they knew what they wouldn't do is stop. Never would they stop even if it cost them their legs, their limbs, their entire body. I mean, it didn't matter at that point, 'cause they'd be dead either way. Their pants and the thump of their feet were the only things filling the stale air this silent night, for as soon as they turned into this darkened alleyway, the city seemed to have fallen into a deep slumber. Is it still following us? The shorter one forced the words out between breaths. I don't know. The other coughed to a halt and spluttered, massaging his broken legs. What the hell are you doing? Move! The shorter one howled like a wolf. I can't, okay? Besides, where's there to run? The taller one argued back, waving an arm to the brick wall ahead. Great. Now what? I don't know. You brought us here. This was all your idea. And the two argued, sharing deathly glares and tense muscles they strained to keep their hands to themselves. The air was stale. The apartment walls closing in were grim and moldy, and the ground was a dumping ground where rats thrived. This wasn't shelter, but where else were they to go? Else they'd be captured and eaten alive. We'll have to camp here. The short one sighed. No. This place is a mess. No one in their right mind would stay here even a night. Mother will be worried. Let's go. No, you're not leaving. We're not leaving till we get what we came for. The short one reached out and gripped the other's wrist like a screw in a nut. What did we come for? Death. An insane beast is chasing us, and you think we should stay here, backed in a corner and cowering? The taller one raged, wriggling in the strong grip. A coward runs away. You're scared of a vampire? Pathetic. We're getting that gem and that vampire knows where it is. Vampires don't exist. Then what do you call what's chasing us? Vampire or not, you know it's no animal. And with that, the short one was right. The flash and blur of its movements, the hunger for meat, the inability to tire, that was certainly no human. But still, the taller one refused to believe in the supernatural and the gem. Will you shut up with your theories? Why do I have to be the one to keep you safe? You'll never be safe from your own stupidity. Well, at least my blindness won't kill me like... Wait, do you hear that? The short one held a finger to the other's lips. No. What is it? Has it found us? They hissed. I don't. And there it was. At the very end of their little alleyway stood the tall, slender beast. Their thin hair blowing around their face, but never concealed the shadow of their sharp jawbone. Its posture flawless, and its bony hands twitched as it stood silent and still like a statue. The two hugged each other in fear. Neither one seemed to care anymore whose dumb idea led them into this mess. They just wanted out. The creature loomed closer, and time stood still as it took every silent, slow step towards them, until bam, it stood right before them in an instant. It didn't say anything as it smiled a sly, slim grin at the two quivering little rats. "Take him!" The shorter one screamed at last as it loomed closer, holding out the taller one and making a run for it as the creature sunk its fangs into their neck. The tall one screamed and squealed, wriggled and writhed as pain consumed the body. They watched the short one run away. A single tear ran down his face, and that's when Kyron knew Asher was no longer his brother. Many years later, the forest is calm. The water trickles beside me. The leaves rustle softly, and the moonlight dances on the lush green carpet below. It's so peaceful. I think to myself as I rest on a log, wiping a little blood from my teeth and sighed, eyeing the corpse next to me. More people have been coming lately, but never going. I won't let anyone leave. No, no one leaves. I sigh, springing up, and with a swift scoop I throw the body and launch it into the river. This one was a feisty one, fat too, but all the same very tasty. He looks so soundly asleep. I think as I watch his limp face disappear within the sparkling laps of liquid. I can't remember the last time I slept, breathed, laughed, or ate real food. They're lucky they died still able to do those things. I'd do anything to go back. But I can't. I don't even remember my real name. I don't even remember my old brother's name. But I remember that face, that stone serious look of relief as he ran away and left me there as food. He died that day, as did I, and here I'll wait for his return to get my revenge. You see, he wanted the immortality gem. I found it. 20 years ago I found it, resting peacefully inside a dragon's belly. I keep it with me in my cave deep within this forest. Everyone who comes here to claim it for themselves is slain. I don't care the reason either. I only care about the short one. That's what we used to call him. Only 4 feet tall he stood. Sometimes I wonder if he'll make it in time after all. Thanks to him, I'll live forever. He won't, and I'll make sure of that. Still, time to wind down, I guess. Sleeping isn't an option anymore, so I opted for research instead. It's amazing how much you can find out with unlimited time. That's how I found out about the immortality gem, after all. I don't need light to see in the pitch black this cave has swallowed, but it helps unwanted guests to find it, so I snap a match and it crackles away. The hours always tick by as an eternity, and the pain of youth burns through me still. I don't remember myself. I think as I brush my long, pale blonde hair in the mirror to which all I see is the reflection of the candle-lit table and assortments of pens and paper scattered on it. I haven't seen myself in too long, nor heard my own name. I died, so I thought, why bother? I'm a vampire now. Sharp, blood-stained fangs mark my sins, and my inhumane speed and strength aid them. With every kill I wish I could mourn. I know it's wrong, yet I can't resist that sweet sound of death and its rich taste. And I'm about to do it again as I hear a faint crack of a leaf just outside. I do what I always do and flatten myself against the wall, right next to the door, and wait to pounce. The footsteps are weary, slow, every one with precision. But they're scared. The hesitation with every toe gives it away. As they should be. After all, no one likes it when someone invades their house, right? They're closer, closer, closer. Flash! I make my move. I pounce and pin them down in a whirl, which sends their head into a spin. A smile infects my face as I meet eyes with them. My dear short one, finally you've come to me. He's older now, much older, but I can still recognize that shallow, hollow expression anywhere. I doubt he'll recognize me. I'm a different being. I died the night he did, and I haven't recognized him since. His eyes meet mine in pure horror, pupils like a grain of sand, and eyeballs bulging out. He wiggles like a worn, squirming in my grip, and mumbling nonsense into my palm, covering his mouth. You wanted this. I spit, letting him go to grab the gem before holding him down again so fast he doesn't have a chance to even move. I can see his eyes light up in his fear, but I won't let him speak. I don't care what he has to say. I don't care what he has to live for, what he's achieved, or who will mourn his passing. He used me and left me to die, and now it's time he paid the price. Well, that's tough, 'cause you ain't getting it. You shouldn't have killed me that night. Perhaps you would have succeeded, became immortal. But now, you die just as I did. I hiss at him before lunging in and letting my fangs consume his every inch of being. He jerks and squirms, and I enjoy every little pain, felt breath that escapes him before he goes limp and freezes. I decide to stare at him for a bit, thinking about everything he did to me. His stone expression fills me with victory and content. The blood dripping off my fangs marks his fate. I did it. Finally, I can live in peace. So I take his body and throw it into the river like all the others, until it fades into the frozen moonlight. The gem is still in my hand. I have no use for it now. My job is done. I ponder my options and decide in the end to smash it and discard it in a river as well. That's it. I've done it. I've done it. I've done it. Day such and such, living partly in the captors, the bulking flesh, slice of space, under unknown amount of earth. A mattress, one which has the scent of the hole, and a hole to the right of the foot of it, 4 feet of space to sit up, a waterspout for gerbils, ferrets, and other such domesticated rodents that hangs from the top left edge and protrudes from a small cavity in the ceiling, and a tray of slop that unfolds from the right wall 3 times a day. Living partly in effluvia. One light been on for days, a week, and maybe an amount of time practical for the plans of the flesh klepto or collector, to satisfy its needs, once again be suffocated and wake up back. Please be back. There is only a suggestion of night. A mute, dull mentality signals me for sleep. Sleep entailed by the lucid image of a pulsing mass, tectonic movement overhead that throbs and shifts, sex from the devil, the enclosing cosmos fetishizing its own existential lack of being. Shivering. Late nights or other, I look outside at the rusted steel door, or a metal plate that once maybe had the posited application of a door. At the chosen foot of the mattress, with 4 grates in the center, viewing a crouching hallway, appearing abandoned almost, placed between 2 floors. I'm at the end of but not staring down. And a barrel, which sits across the hall. One could also steal. Corrupted by time with razored lips. I hear its breath, I swear, and I imagine the air wisping out of the crooked, spacious, and almost interlocking teeth. The barrel, for brevity, because that is what it is to me, feels full sometimes and empty others. It stays there, not looking, but listening to itself, to me, devouring the slop or drinking the ever-full drips of water, or the scratching I've begun on the walls, bled and stopped after nails gave way before the wall. The barrel's full. Always full, or always empty, I fear, and I've truly lost ways of which to return to normalcy. If not, the barrel acts or is employed as some regressed pre-oral psychosexual stage, an in utero comfort embellished with tetanus. I think there is hair, almost draped, but bunched up out of the barrel like a weight is leaning and forcing it up, and over being some consequence. Maybe it's shifting, less is draping. The other day I focused on myself, unwillingly, where my mind became singular, an apparatus of meat and blood and electrical impulses which is whole. The first time it felt whole, like an independent floating consciousness of itself, where if I was to crack my skull on the cement, yet still I will think I would continue to hold a sense of consciousness and perception, but there are no gaps in the singular entity, highlighting a true blink, thought as something which appears into existence and will cease. The complete nothing like there never was. Could a false feeling of reality highlight the true reality? The hair is draping more studiously, like the prim god. The flesh klepto's ego punctuated its own control, its own dominance, and my own fragility. I've tried starving myself and woke up full. Currently, all-encompassing and can't be wrong, or maybe I'm brought to a place with no current or surrounding events. The barrel is always full. Not a flicker of weight has left, not a balance has shifted, nor a glimpse at validity of its fullness. The now combed hair only glistens under the barrel's rim shadow, streaks of a lesser dark, a shape not fully It's in there, like a mold of whatever form the barrel desires, cocooning comfort in a habitat indifferent to your needs, with breathing restricted to a wheeze of external pressures on the flesh klepto's diaphragm. Probably. If reason hasn't left and my own discovered singular consciousness is not deceiving me, then the barrel is full, but I can't help but worry. How time ticks, plentiful in our own reckless abandon, cutting short the intrepid. Loneliness sets in within the first week, maybe days, possibly hours, and I feel observed enough to sustain, but observed by a phantom, a barrel. The more horrifying possibility is that of true abandonment, left in the dark or dull light, to entertain myself within a careless space, but the way the weight of the barrel stares, insisting on the space, brings forth its profound eyes. Possibly, eyes which gain pleasure from my sense of abandonment, or has the mutual feeling of also being observed, gaining its own hermit-esque solace in the company of having eyes on it, eyes which it created to be lesser than it, eyes which it created to be lesser than it, eyes which marvel at the suggestion of its existence, allowing the theorization. I could also be incidental to the flesh klepto, a prize, of which I occupy its sickening terrarium, one not much different from others in its collection. But if not, if the barrel or steel drum is empty, I am terrified to think the flesh klepto walks, collects, abandons, a different kind of incidental and unfeeling. So unfeeling that its connection to the world is questioned, never intending but always taking, like me, now stuck in this slice of life. I sense a presence. There must be a presence. Something to direct my banal rage. I don't feel sick, hungry, or dying, but the end is coming soon. When this is all over, the barrel should be full. No, it must be full. The barrel is full. The barrel is full. The barrel is full. Wah. Dear reader, some of you are familiar with one or more of my stories. Many of them feature a character by the name of Samuel. He's a trickster of sorts. Sometimes he is mischievous, and sometimes he's pure evil. Today, I want to tell you another Samuel story. A true story. Hei verba legendo, ianuum obscuritatis apparis. Curses are real, but so are counter-curses. By reading these words, you are protected from him, but he insists that you know him. This is the story of how Samuel cursed me. A cautionary tale. I first met Samuel when I was still in college. He was disguised as a janitor. I was studying English and, like many English majors, I was trying to publish my writing. Of course, I was failing miserably. Imposter syndrome hit me hard, and I still have not been able to shake it. Isn't there a cure for it yet? One night, I was deep inside the school library, tucked away in one of the many cozy nooks. I typed away on my laptop. Bo Sai. Another short story. I fell in love with the idea in my head, but the words showing up on the page sapped every ounce of optimism I had. Another pile of crap. I submitted it to a contest anyway, and of course, heard nothing. I could imagine the judges laughing as they read the garbage I had just submitted. That is when I first saw him. Or when I first noticed that I saw him. This was the first time we spoke. He rolled his car past my cozy corner, stopped, then backed up with keen interest. Watching me type for a few seconds, he grinned in his charming way and said, "Ah, yes, the Midnight Writer, churning out the next masterpiece." I snorted a laugh and said, "Not quite. Churning out a bunch of trash is all I'm capable of." "I seriously doubt that," he said. He then held out his hand and said, "I'm Samuel, and you are?" "I'm Dan. Nice to meet you, Samuel." He nodded. At the time, I didn't find it odd to be sharing so much with a complete stranger. He had a very inviting way about him. Charming, with a British accent. He was tall and thin, with an easy smile. He is the type of guy nobody knows but everyone wants to talk to at a party. He sat down across from my little table as if he had no other place to be. "Tell me, what are we writing today?" I spun my laptop around and invited him to look. He read my story with intense interest, nodding and smiling at times, then becoming solemn and quiet at others. Watching anyone else read my writing right in front of me would have sent me into a panic attack. But I was anesthetized by his allure. It was already too late for me. Umbre te persequentur, et imago tua iam tua non erit. When he was done, he spun my laptop around and clapped. Brilliant! I loved it. Especially at the end when we find out the guy was trapping them all along. I was so scared for him, and it turns out he knew what he was doing the whole time. I smiled reluctantly, distrustful of an actual compliment. "Dan, tell me, how many stories have you published? Have you written your first novel yet?" I shook my head. "None, but I have written a novel, still editing it." Nodding, Samuel sat back. His eyes flared as if by a hungry fire, just for a moment. "Yes, the path to publication can be treacherous. What if I told you I could help you? What would that be worth to you?" "Help me?" I asked. Samuel said nothing, just stared at me with his wide eyes, allowing me to explore the possibilities in my own mind. "You mean, you know someone who can publish my work?" My face burned at the thought of calling my writing work. How pretentious of me. Samuel leaned forward, sliding the laptop between us aside. "Not exactly, but what if I told you I could give you a story guaranteed to get published, and eventually your novel? Isn't that what it's all about? Your name on the lips of the world." I had no idea he was talking about himself at this point, but I think that was his intent. He made it about me, and I was all too eager to lap up what he was feeding me. My eyes filled with rose-colored flashes from the future. Critics heaping praise on me for my work. Contest wins. Publishers knocking on my door with offers to sell my novel. Yes, having people read my work and loving it was the whole point. Yes. Samuel silently slid his chair around the table next to me, watching me. As my mind rode this merry-go-round of possibilities, he leaned in close and whispered, "What would it be worth to you?" And that's when the deal was done. A barter struck. In hindsight, it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? I'm sure reading this now, you must think I should have laughed at the guy and been on my way. Or even if I took him seriously at the time as soon as he left, I should have come to my senses, right? Well, that's not how it works with Samuel. Once the hook is set, you're on the line. The only thing he told me was that he would feed me my first story. I asked how. He said, "In your dreams. You'll know it when you see my face. Write it, and it will reap for you what you desire." I stared at the space in front of me, a tall bookshelf. The first in a series of many spanning all the way to the front of the library. But I didn't see them. I saw the future. In a voice that I barely recognized, I asked, "What do I have to do in return?" With his mouth close to my ear, Samuel slid the laptop back in front of me and whispered, "Promise me your soul." Wow. Wow. I froze. Not out of fear. Out of confusion. Should I say it out loud? The preposterous proposal seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. Who would believe such an agreement was enforceable? Or even real? Before I could ask, he answered, "Write it." A blank Word document stared at me from my laptop screen. My fingers floated down to the keyboard, and I wrote the words, "I promise my eternal soul to Samuel Romero." November 8, 2016. Underneath, I typed my name. Samuel added a single uppercase, and it was done. I still have the document saved on my desktop. Its title is KDI, the legal symbol for the word contract. I haven't opened the document since, but I know it's there, waiting for me. Samuel animam tuum vindicat omne spiritu, quem capis. I dreamed that night. Before I could entertain the possibility that it was all a farce, I dreamed. Have you seen him in your dreams? I wrote the story I witnessed in that dream. That story won second place in a NYC Midnight contest just 2 months later. I've had many other dreams since. All Samuel stories. And I discovered that he feeds me stories in which he plays a central role. He's not feeding me fiction. All of the stories I've written about him are real. They all happened. I started researching them. It took some time, but I've been able to track down the real events in many of them already. He's done some things. Horrible things. But I can't stop writing them now. I've tried, believe me. And whenever I do, he is there, prodding me to continue. And the longer it takes for me to get back to it, the less gentlemanly he feels about it. He turns my dreams into nightmares. He'll be a face in the crowd. Then he's just around every corner. A constant reminder of the contract. He once showed up as a bartender at my cousin's wedding in Rhode Island. It was as if he were a perfect stranger who knew a terrible secret. He handed me a drink with an angry smile and said, "So, I guess it's back to work on Monday, yes?" He didn't wait for an answer or look at me again. Back home after the wedding, I realized we have ourselves a codependent relationship now. He needs people to know him. His plan was to become famous himself. Or infamous. He knows that if enough people read his stories and get to know him, they'll eventually revere him. Worship him. And that's all it takes. That reverence. And just like me, they won't even notice until it's too late. Like a vampire bat that secretes an anesthetic in their saliva, I have been anesthetized. He's been feeding off of me for years, and I never felt the bite. Slowly gathering a flock. Sure, the flock is small right now, but it will grow. He wants to include you. But no, it won't be you. You're protected now. Samuel has been alive for hundreds of years. Alive is a slippery term, though. I'm not sure if such evil can truly be alive. But he's been here for much longer than I can possibly understand. He has been the fuel for every evil uprising that threatened the human race over millennia, only to be suppressed by the goodness of humankind. But this is the main event now. The internet, social media, a global presence. They've made his conquest possible. This is what he's been practicing for. Sure, we can chuckle at the notion that this beast you've never even heard of, before suddenly rising up and becoming a powerful presence, wielding such evil. But like I said, it always starts small. Look around you, though. Do things seem to be getting better? Or worse? Are we on the precipice of something truly evil about to happen? Does you feel safe? Surrounded by goodness and light? I wanted to write this today as a warning to you. As the famous vampire killer, Peter Vincent, once said, "Forewarned is forearmed." Now you know about him, and you can protect yourself. Don't let yourself get roped in. I've included 4 phrases embedded in the text of this letter to you as a protective spell. The final phrase is, Ultimo verbo dicto, huic mundo, eam non pertinibus. Did you read all of them? If not, go back and make sure you read the words in your mind. Hear them even if you don't know the pronunciation. My eternal soul is doomed, but if I can save you, then I will consider myself redeemed in the eyes of my God. My only hope is that he saves me from my nearly certain fate after I depart this mortal coil. As long as I write Samuel's stories, I have breath in my lungs and life in my heart. But as soon as I stop feeding him, I die. And then I will be doomed to spend an eternity in a caged hell I cannot fathom. Samuel has designed a place outside of our realm, but very close. And just as it is in this world, it seems in his world. It always starts small. He welcomes you with promises of bliss and abundance. But soon enough, you notice a tiny crack in the otherwise pristine sky. And then the facade crashes around you, leaving you in a desolate wasteland where physical pain is the only escape from a psychological torture that will torment you until the universe collapses on itself and begins again. I want to thank you for reading this. As I stated at the beginning, this is a true story. I pray that you read every word and took it to heart. And now that you've read every word, I must conclude with an apology. An apology because if you weren't particularly frightened by what you read, you're going to have to start getting scared right away. The words you read were not actually a protective spell. They were a trap. He was unhappy with my progress as a writer and made me write this letter. I would urge you to use Google Translate to learn the meanings of the 4 Latin phrases contained within the text. Samuel showed me through terrifying images in nightmares what he would do to me if I did not write this letter, so please forgive me. Since I am so unsuccessful at writing, he has not benefited from the stories I have written about him to the extent he previously expected. And now, you have been anesthetized. I'm so sorry. It's already too late for you. By voluntarily reading the words, you have entwined yourself in the very same nemorosa as me. Misery loves company. It will start slowly. It always starts small. At first, you'll be able to convince yourself it's all nonsense. Just a silly story written around Halloween to scare you. But I assure you, it's all true. This is really happening to you now. This particular contest was the perfect feint. A masquerade. The first time it happens, you won't even notice it. You'll see him somewhere in public. A grocery store, the gym, or on the street. He'll be charming and polite. And then his image will evaporate from your mind as quickly as it appeared. You will begin to feel as though someone is watching you. You'll dismiss it, as you always have. But the feeling will return. And then you'll see him again. His face will be vaguely familiar. But that happens sometimes, doesn't it? Until you see him again. After a few coincidences, he will start showing up in more intimate places. Situations you wouldn't expect. He'll be the most politely intrusive person you've ever met. All that time while you dismissed the little bites as minor annoyances, he will already have begun feeding. I don't really know how long it takes, but the changes are so subtle that you won't even notice. But the people around you will. Those closest to you will find you to be more and more paranoid. You'll see his face when he's not there, insisting to your loved ones that the evil is there. Right there. All they'll see is empty space where you witness unspeakable evil. Whispering voices will taunt you from behind empty shadows. No one else will hear them. You'll see something move out of the corner of your eye, but when you turn to look, nothing will be there. The demons coming to drag you to Samuel's hell will be getting closer. He will drain your soul from you, leaving an empty husk. Much like the exuvia a cicada leaves after it molts. Your goodness, your soul, will be imprisoned in his world, far away from the paradise we live now. Replaced here on earth, among your loved ones by a doppelganger. A soulless extension of the evil that is Samuel Romero. Another soldier in his army ordained to rid the world of innocence, drawing pure evil to reign with insanity and relentless fury. Please forgive me, for I am weak. You would have done the same in my place.